Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the KPC podcast. I'm Karsan Turner.
And I'm Hannah Thurman.
Today, we have a lot to talk about, so much to talk about that I'm not even going to give a prerequisite of what we're going to talk about. We're just going to get right into it. So, Hannah, go ahead and get started.
All right, we're going to do some highlights from the week. So, a lot of discussion on gun control this week led to multiple companies cut their ties with the NRA. Dick's Sporting Goods will no longer sell assault-style firearms. They banned high-capacity magazines and bump stocks. And they will no longer sell to people that are under the age of 21 that wishes to purchase a gun. Walmart followed in its footsteps, I believe the day or two afterwards. Mm-hmm. So that happened. And then President Trump surprisingly told lawmakers about being somewhat supportive of gun control measures, raising the age to 21. Mm-hmm. He brought up a bill that did not pass after the Sandy Hook massacre that was kind of a bipartisan deal about raising background checks, I believe.
So that was something that once Sandy Hook happened, the idea was proposed. Nothing really went with it, but Trump is open to picking that back up to make it harder or not necessarily harder, but having stricter background checks.
Yep.
What else does that bill have again? That's actually
background check proposal, and I think that, or more background checks, exemptions for family and friends, specific ban on a gun registry, expansion of interstate sales, criminal checks, and a commission on violence.
Okay. That makes sense.
That went down.
And then didn't he speak with the NRA directly after doing that too?
He did. So the next day he met with the NRA, and a top lobbyist announced that, basically Trump retracted what he said on Wednesday to Congress. He doesn't necessarily support that anymore. So I was very pleasantly surprised on Wednesday when Trump was saying that to Congress. Yeah. I was, I didn't ever think that a Republican president would say that, let alone Trump. Uh-huh. But obviously he is kind of backtracking. He tweeted about a wonderful meeting with the NRA, but he didn't really have anything to say about retracting his statements. So that came from the NRA itself.
Okay. So it wasn't from what the NRA said, he proposed this idea of more background checks, then met with the NRA, but the NRA said, he wasn't serious about this. Right. But Trump himself did not specify.
He just said it was a good meeting with the NRA,
Okay.
No Second Amendment. So.
I think then it could be, like I said, Trump is Donald Trump, so you don't really know what he's actually thinking or what he's doing.
What he's gonna do.
I would assume that he is potentially just weighing his options and looking at both sides to find what exactly consensus we can come to, which is good. I like that he's
and that's what a president should do.
Right.
The president should look at both sides, see what the consensus is, the vast majority of Americans want, and that's what they should go with.
Yeah, and I also thought he did that town hall meeting last week, and I'm not sure, I don't know if President Obama or previous presidents had done something like that before, but it was a very, very good meeting. Yeah, yes, it wasn't just the Parkland shooting victims.
There was,
it was
Sandy Hook parents
and one of the
Columbine.
One of the parents from Columbine started this nonprofit organization that was reducing gun violence, but it was also had a big emphasis on suicide, since that is what really kills a lot of people, is the suicide rates with the guns. And watching that, I was very, very impressed that he would actually go through with doing something like that, and he didn't shy away from receiving any harsh criticism from people. And that's just not an easy thing to do, to sit in a room with all these people who are, they have such a strong stance on gun control, and they probably just absolutely hate him and are just, so I think that's a very good and mature move for him. And I think that's hopefully making him reconsider what he thinks. And even if he doesn't, pass the most favorable gun laws post this, just the overall idea that he at least worked through something instead of just, nope, I'm going to do it this way. See you later. I'm not going to talk to any of you guys. Get out of my face.
Right.
So, but then again, what happened yesterday, we can never tell.
And plus he isn't going to be the one that's going to be pushing everything. That's Congress. That's up to Congress.
Yeah.
Unless he wants to do like an executive action, but I just don't see that happening because he would get ridiculed by a lot of Republicans if he pushed.
Yeah, especially if
control.
it were a gun control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What else do we have in our...
Yeah, some other highlights from the week is that Jared Kushner supposedly did not pass his security check, which will leave him unable to see specified documents. But, I mean, realistically, let's be real. He's still probably going to see those documents. Well, it's Trump's son-in-law. I mean...
What documents are these again?
Just like classified stuff that really only the president and his like people around him can see.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really pay much to the story because I just think nothing's going to come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
just something we got to throw out there.
Right, yeah. And then Hope Hicks, the communications person, resigned, saying that she had to tell little white lies for the president. So after it was for the Mueller investigation, I think she had to testify maybe.
The Mueller investigation, is that the Russia thing? That's still going on?
Oh, yes. It will never end, probably.
They'll figure something out whenever, either at the end of 5 years or at the end of 8 years. It's like whenever Trump's out of office, they're like, oh, and by the way, we found out. And we'll be like, we don't really care.
It just needs to end.
I'm over it. So what was she before she resigned for telling little white lies?
She was the White House communications director, I believe. So like what Anthony Scaramucci was.
Okay.
She, took over his.
Oh, so who's going to take over her new spot?
We don't know, but there have been numerous people in this position, so we will find out.
Yeah, I guess so. Are there any other stories that you've got right now?
You can take it away with your big one that we really want to discuss on and get into.
Yes, yeah. So I've always been a personal believer that whenever something big happens in our country, like a shooting mainly just a shooting, instead of just jumping to conclusions about what's happened, I typically give it maybe about a week to see what actually comes out before I make any conclusions. And I think the biggest example of why you need to do this is because is from David Hogg. He's one of the survivors who are from the Parkland shooting, and he's been very active along with other students, which, as a disclaimer, I think that's great. I think the fact that these students are speaking out against something that they believe in is super awesome. Even though I completely disagree with where the direction he's going, I still can't help but admire the fact that these students are doing what they're doing. So David Hogg, he didn't have some nice things to say about the NRA, and I think this was, directly after the shooting. News outlets like CNN, MSNBC just loved what he was saying, so they just gave him a lot of screen time. And I think that now that we know that the shooter himself, he wasn't a member of the NRA. He had the only tie that this shooting, hit the mic. The only tie that this shooting has to the NRA is that the student, when he was a student, was a part of a gun club that received funding from the NRA, which I'm kind of curious, why did the school have a rifle club? But, oh well.
People love their guns in this country.
So that was the only tie. It doesn't make sense to me why David Hogg would be so critical on the NRA. And then he said something about how it's like you're just helping. Let me get the actual quote right up. Okay, so he says, if you can't get elected without taking money from child murderers, why are you running? Of course, this is him referring to Senator Marco Rubio. And then what is her name? Dana Loesch. Dana Loesch. She's a spokeswoman for the NRA, saying that, she's evil. She's a national propagandist for the NRA, which it's like, she's not a propagandist. She is the spokeswoman for it. But he also made this claim that, what did he say? Oh, she's just trying to sell guns to foreign donors or something like that. But the NRA receives most of its money through memberships, and so that was just a flat-out lie. And I think the problem is that now, because the thing about the shooting, all the inconsistencies is, one, the FBI knew full and well that this shooter was a threat, and they just didn't do anything about it. The local law enforcement, the local police department had over 30 complaints about this shooter, and they knew that he was a threat. And the school guard officers were told not to go into the school while the shooting was happening. none of those have anything to do with the NRA. And I think, and we didn't know about that the moment the shooting happened. You know, this is once we've waited for all of the facts and information to come out. If anything, I feel like David should say, okay, look, I still hate the NRA, but we're going to hold on to this for a moment, and we need to start talking about this stuff, because what happened here, there were so many red flags, and we just looked over them, but instead he just keeps pushing this anti-NRA agenda, and you go on the NRA's website, and they're just a gun club. You get a magazine and a hat that says NRA. They don't say, here's a gun, and you get to shoot one person, and you won't get in trouble, type thing. But you look like you're going to say something, so start talking.
I am very disappointed that all these things happened this time, and it shouldn't have happened. This
right.
School shooting should not have happened, because there were so many red flags and calls and acknowledging that this kid had a problem, and he had voice, that he was going to do what he did.
Yeah.
And so that's very disappointing, and it shouldn't have happened. But you also have to acknowledge that all the shootings in the past have happened. So just because this shooting is different, and there were excuses, people can't fall back on reasons why it shouldn't have happened, because this underlying issue is still that this kid that has all these issues got a gun.
Right.
And there's so many past shootings that still happened, you know, whether or not they had red flags with these people, you know, they all still got guns as well.
Well, I know that the majority of them, because Sandy Hook, he took the weapons from his parents, and that's another thing. I think that with stronger background checks, they would know, oh, I have a son who's mentally ill. Well, we don't know if you should have this rifle because of this instance,
or lock it up.
Yeah, with the the bill that Trump passed. I talked about this a couple weeks ago, that Jimmy Kimmel tried calling it a thing that made it easier for mentally ill people to own guns, where you'd take your case to the court. So it wouldn't, I'm trying to find a way to word this, because my thing is, sorry, I'm just trying to put this together. So for the Sandy Hook shooting, the son had the mental illness, the mom owned the gun. He took the gun from the mom. And to just say, oh, the mom just absolutely can't own a gun, that's a gun restriction that I wouldn't support. But what I'm trying to say is that she could still have the option to say, hey, testify in court, look at this case, look at, my son, am I worthy to have this gun? And then, they would still say no, but to still have him the option for the court to look into that instance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Instead of just a flat out,
So are you saying that should happen? That's something that...
Yeah. So what I'm saying is just that they should have the option to go to the court and have them look at that case. In the instance with the Sandy Hook shooter, they would have denied it because they would have recognized his mental illness.
I don't know if that is super realistic, though, just because I think the court system is so full and busy all the time that, if people really utilize that process, then it would get crazier and probably take forever.
To the local level, is the local court super flooded? Because I know it wouldn't be a Supreme Court case.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've always just thought, because there's all the stupid cases too that go through court, like speeding tickets and everything. But
that makes sense too. And I feel like I was going somewhere else with this, but I completely lost my train of thought. Oh, well, another thing that I was going to talk about is just the media's I hate the mainstream media. I guess I'm a hipster. So, no, I really do think using news outlets like podcasts and going to independent websites are so much better, because what I've noticed about the mainstream outlets is that they put all this attention towards David Hogg and I think her name's Alina Gonzalez, but they do not care about this one kid. What's his name? Kyle Kashuv, who he was a survivor just like all the other students, but simply because he's a Republican, he's a conservative, he's pro-Second Amendment, CNN doesn't want anything to do with him. And I just can't wrap my head around the idea that, you turn on CNN and the anchors will say something like, we need to get this debate started. Oh, but we're not going to pay attention to this one kid who is a survivor, who has a different ideology. Get away from me. We don't want you. Get out. You know what I mean? I
understand where you're coming from, but you have to acknowledge that these news outlets like CNN, they're going to put people on their show that are going to say what their viewers want to hear. I mean, you have to look at Fox too. Fox would probably put the other one on there rather than David. Like, you're not going to see David Hogg on Fox, just like you're probably not going to see. It's just how that works, and it is frustrating because you can't have a debate without the other side. That's such an important part.
Yeah.
But it's highly unlikely that you're going to see someone that has a different viewpoint than what they want their viewers to see on.
Yeah, and I think that's just a big example of how the mainstream media is just, it's on the decline, because no one would know about Kyle Kashuv if they only went on CNN, and no one would really know about David Hogg if they, watched Fox all the time. So I think it shows too that
I think that's why so many people, when it comes to debates and arguments, are so uneducated, because they will never listen to the other side, and you can't create a good argument without listening to the other side.
No, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and someone's calling me on my phone, and why is it showing up on my MacBook? I don't understand technology, but whatever. What was I saying? Oh, I was listening to some podcast, and someone was kind of describing the difference of political views and saying that he compared, like, being on the right side is like having a set of eyes where you look for things that you want, but being on the left side is like having a set of hands where you can reach out and grab things, but you need both in order to get anything done. And it's just crazy how news outlets just are so blind to the other side. But because it's like, well, okay, we were talking before we were filming, and I said before we were filming, let's not talk about how we were talking before we were filming, because that confuses the audience, but I'm already confusing the audience. But no, I was talking about like the NRA and everything, and then you and Cal were like, actually, let me tell you a little bit about lobbyists and stuff like that. And had I just been in an echo chamber where everyone was just agreeing with me, I would have had no idea. So now I have a whole bunch of different things to reconsider, which is a good thing. And I think that's why independent news outlets are starting to take over. So you should really subscribe to this podcast right now. So it's a plug.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you have to say, or?
In regards to like the news outlets, or
anything, because I think this is the conclusion.
Oh,
so in the grand scheme of things.
In the grand scheme of things, yeah, I'm very interested to see what Congress does, what President Trump continues to say. One thing that I am looking forward to is seeing if anything happens with gun legislation. Like I was telling you, like at NPR, with polls, you never know what's coming out, who's saying what, because a lot of the times you're getting, like, if your poll is asking, like, do you support gun legislation, raising the minimum age to 21, you're going to get a lot of people that are very passionate saying yes. And then others that are like, you know what, it doesn't matter, I don't care. They're not going to answer. But that NPR poll said like 82% support doing that. But you still have all these members of Congress that are like, we are not taking away your Second Amendment. We support it. So that'll be interesting to see if it happens, because I do feel like so many Americans are becoming more supportive of minimal gun control legislation. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of Americans see eye to eye on this. I think a lot of people understand that it is a problem. Like you were saying, you have to be 21 to buy a handgun in Kansas, but for
a rifle you can be 18.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, I guess if you think about it, maybe it makes sense, because rifles, you're using it for hunting. Handguns, like we did talk about how suicide is so prevalent in our country, so maybe it has something to do with that. But at the end of the day, it's crazy that you can get something that would do more harm to so many more. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, what is your ideal, like if you were in charge of the United States and you could propose your own gun laws, what would you do about it? So
that's a good question. I definitely support raising the age to 21. I think maybe handguns could be different. If it's already at 21, we can keep it there, but background checks for sure. If they have, you can maybe, I don't even know if you could look at medical records, but say like someone is using medication for like schizophrenia or something like that, like just looking at all that information for sure will help that. And what we had talked about earlier with the red flag, or
how about like the FBI messing up on the shooter, or what?
No, the
what-
red
sorry.
flag, the legislation that would say like, oh, like if I'm a parent and I think my kid,
Yeah.
like that, I think that's an awesome idea. I'm just not sure how many people would come out and utilize that tool. But yeah, like I've always said, if you're a sane person, you want to go hunting, you want to go to a shooting range, have your freaking guns, but you have to support. If you aren't in support of background checks and you love your Second Amendment, I get frustrated because it just doesn't make sense to me. You're basically telling me this makes me seem like I'm not listening to the other side, but like to me, when you say that, I immediately think, well, do you think you can't pass a background check?
Yeah, that's a very plausible response to that, because I have always been under that same impression. I'm very pro-gun, but I think background checks are very necessary because they have the ability to pick up on things that others can't. And because if I'm not doing anything wrong, then I mean, yeah, you can check out everything that I've done because I'm fine. Yeah.
We'll just make it a little harder for you to get your guns, but you'll get at the end of the day probably.
Yeah,
I don't imagine that a lot of things would change.
That's true. Do you support whenever Trump said something about arming teachers? What did you think about that?
I absolutely hate that idea.
Why is that?
I just think that it's just so stupid to me. I think that teachers need to worry about teaching, and their job is not to protect their students. At the end of the day, it's to teach these students, and that's their passion. That's why they got into this. If they had known, like, all right, when you go, imagine having to change your school of education like requirements. Like, okay, so now you're gonna go to your gun shooting class.
Yeah.
Like, I know that wouldn't happen. That's like bizarre to think about, but like, it's not their responsibility to learn how to shoot a gun, to aim. They don't need to take time out of their lives to learn that. And if they're uncomfortable using a gun in the first place, why would you put that pressure on them even more?
Do you support the idea of a law that said something like, oh, well, if you're a teacher and you really like guns and you want to raise, you can go through this training course, and if there was a teacher who said, I actually want to be armed, do you think that could be something to look into, even if it were maybe one or two teachers in a whole school?
I think for sure you can definitely look into it, but it depends on who's in your classroom.
Yeah.
You have to talk to your students. If they're uncomfortable with that idea, then I think that you have to go off what your students say rather than the country as a whole.
Yeah. And I mean,
because they're the ones in the classroom, like if I'm not in the classroom, but everyone in that classroom's like, yeah, like I want my teacher to have a gun, then that's what's going to work for that classroom.
Yeah, I, because after this shooting, I instantly jumped the gun on like, yeah, we need to arm our teachers. But when you just think of there's so many different factors that go into owning a gun, just because sometimes it can, I mean, it's super, super rare, but that's not something you want to mess with, that it can just misfire, because then it's also, where are you going to put it? The teacher, if they have it holstered the whole time, who's to say that a student couldn't overpower them? But if you keep it, keeping it locked up, I think that's something that really does need to be looked into, but I wouldn't be opposed to it if it were absolutely not a requirement, but just an incentive if there just happens to be a teacher who's pro-gun, which AKA 90% of the teachers that were in my high school. So I feel like they would love to do something like that.
Yeah, in my high school, it's the complete opposite. I'm sure 90% of my teachers would say that that's just bizarre. So.
And I was going to say this earlier, but I forgot, but now I just remembered. I think one of the biggest pros, if any, that have come out of this shooting is that no one has really talked about the shooter since the incident, which is good, because I really do believe, a lot of these shooters want to be famous. Yeah. And I like how after this incident, no one really cares who he is, because now we're focusing on what we can actually do. And I know there are a couple of news outlets who have started refusing to show the face and even say the name of the shooter, which
I support that 100%. I think that's how it should be handled.
Yeah, and I think that's even a subtle way to start helping too, because if they can't get famous from it, then they might not want to do it. Yeah, but cool. I think that's all I had to say for this podcast. So, you have any closers or?
No, I think I'm good.
Sweet. Thank you guys for checking out the podcast. And what is today? Friday. We will see you back on Monday with more of the KPC podcast.